Hello, everyone, and welcome. I think we're just going to wait a few more minutes, see if any last stragglers will enter the waiting room. Alrighty, hello everyone and welcome, oh my God, sorry. And thank you for joining us today on our virtual talk. We ask that through this presentation, you keep yourselves muted. If you do have any questions, please type your questions into the chat on the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to answer those and address them at the end of this program. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, we welcome you as well. Our Facebook audience can also ask questions using the comment section on Facebook. We will be monitoring those questions and answering those questions at the end of our program as well. Please note that this talk is being recorded and live streamed and will be posted to our social media channels once the talk is over. If you would like to rewatch this talk or watch previous virtual tours and talks, please check out our YouTube or our Facebook pages. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, Bill, to you today. His talk is entitled The Collection of Russian Icons at the Timken Museum of Art. And without further ado, you're good to take it away. Thank you, Bill.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the presentation, everything you wanted to know about Russian icons at the Timken, but were afraid to raise your hand. The icons can be off-putting. They've been described as, they talk about Byzantine petrification, Byzantine rigor mortis, hieratic stiffness, rigidity, gloom, lifeless poses. I put this to you. When at the end of this presentation, ask yourself, ask me if you wish, is that what you saw? Petrification, rigor mortis, hieratic stiffness, rigidity, gloom, and lifeless poses? Let's hope not. Anyway. Icon, what is an icon? Icon comes from the Greek word for image. There's a line in the Bible, he is the image of God, referring to Jesus, and the word for image, of course, is icon. The Greek word icon means image. So, what is icon and the way we're talking about it? Greta Garbo was an icon, but that's a different thing. What we're talking about is in churches, excuse me, in churches of the Eastern rites, a venerated representation of Jesus, his mother, what? His mother? Why are you saying it that way? This will become obvious just a little bit later. Anyway, Jesus, his mother, saints, etc., done in the Byzantine manner. The iconography is strictly regulated by the church. Human forms are stylized. The positions of the characters are prescribed and maintained for centuries. Now, icons are an integral part of the Orthodox tradition. The doctrine of the veneration of icons was adopted in the year 787 of the Common Era, and it determined that icons should be venerated the same as the cross. The more we see the icons, the more we venerate and love the prototype. In other words, what the icon represents. This type of art became increasingly conventional, tending toward flatness. Emphasis is on the spiritual content of the image. For us, in other words, in Western art, and a picture is a window into the world around us. An icon the kind we're talking about, is a window into the spiritual, invisible world. And the naturalistic style is not suited for this kind of representation. The principle of Orthodox theology is not in proving the truth, but in bearing witness to it. Now, as for the second commandment, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Well, as far as icons are concerned, and the Orthodox Church, when the divine word became flesh, it became capable of being depicted. This type of art developed as a distinctly Christian alternative to classic Greek art, which the Orthodox regard as intrinsically pagan. Now, Byzantine art did not aspire to freedom of individual expression. This art is impersonal and traditional. It transmits dogma of the Eastern Church. The artist's personality is suppressed. The attitudes and expressions of the figures are all determined according to tradition. And if an artist were to attempt innovation, he would likely risk incurring a charge of heresy. Icons are not didactic. And when we study Renaissance art, we're told that this art is didactic. It's to illustrate the Bible to the people who can't read. Well, that's not true for icons. The icons usually, though, tell you what they are in Greek, some in Russian. Now, we're not expecting everyone to read Greek. However, there are a very few things that we can talk about, a very few. And if this were a graded course, I'd say this is going to be on the quiz. And so we can slide. This is not a Timken icon. I picked it simply because it's easier to illustrate certain things that I want to point out, things that we will see over and over again. Notice there's writing on this. There's writing in 1, 2, 3, 4 places. One of the places is very, very hard to see. It's on, you say, well, what is this? This is the Holy Family, of course. And it's got writing on it. Okay, so let's talk about this writing because we're going to see it over and over and over again. I hope everyone, okay, at the top, as you look at it, the upper left, you see 2 groups of letters. That's Greek. The swing dash above means that these are abbreviations. They are the first and last letters of 2 words in Greek. The first word looks like MP, and it's, remember that P, or what we call P, in Greek, that's an R. So what you're looking at is MR, the first and last letters of the Greek word, and the English word, the German word, a lot of it, for mother. And then you see something beside it, and oh, I can't tell what that is. It looks sort of like OY or something. What you're looking at is theta upsilon, the first and last letters of the word meaning of God. Miter Theou, Mother of God. Remember, depictions of Jesus and his mother, she is always referred to as Miter Theou. It's Mater Dei in Latin, and in English, the Mother of God. It's always there. And some of these slides, you're not going to be able to see it. And that's why I picked this. It's there, the upper left, Miter Theou. Now, you look at the figure of Jesus. To the right of the halo, I hope you can see there's something there. There's writing there. It's really hard to see. I'm going to wait until the next slide to say what that is. Okay, now at the upper right, written in Greek, not abbreviated. It says Saint Joseph. And then we look at the halo. The halo has 3 Greek letters on it. At the top is Omicron, and on the left is, yes, Omicron. At the left is the letter Omega, and on the right is the letter Nu or N. That is not an abbreviation, that's 2 words. The O is the, and then the Omega Nu or ON, that's a noun. That's the active present participle of the verb to be in Greek. It says on. Now, in the Bible, when Moses is getting his marching orders from God, he stops for a minute. Wait. What if they want to know what your name is? And in the Hebrew, it says, I am who I am. And then later on, God says to him, tell him I am sent you. The Latin says, ego sum qui sum, I am who I am. But the Greek Bible doesn't say that. The Greek Bible says what's written on that halo. The Greek Bible says, I am on, the being. And you will see that. Now, right beside, I hope you can tell there's writing there, but I'll wait for the next slide to say what that's about. Notice also, and this you're going to see again and again, Mary is wearing a cloak, whatever you want to call it. In Greek, it's called maphorion. One thing about icons, you end up with all these Greek words you can't find in the dictionary. And anyway, it's purple. Or no, actually it's maroon. The descriptions of it say reddish blue, but to me it looks maroon. And notice that there are three what? You see those 3 things that look like flowers or crosses or stars or something that are on that? And I hope everyone can see there are 3. One's over her head, and then Jesus seems to be pointing to one of them, and then one of them is right beside his halo. Those, I've never seen any Greek word for what those things are, but they are of Syrian origin. There are 3 of them. They refer to her virginity. There are 3 of them, prenatal, in partu, and postpartum. In other words, she is 3 times virgin, the virgin prior to, during, and after the birth of Jesus. And then we'll go on to the next slide. Oh goodness, what's that? This is obviously not one of ours. This is for illustrative purposes. But notice they didn't have access to Greek, so they just wrote the closest Roman. And there it is again. Everything we just talked about. MP on the upper left, that's mu, rho. That's the abbreviation of Greek mother. The thing it looks like OY, that's as close as they could get to the Greek. Mother of God, it's right there. It's always going to be there. We see that we can't see all the halo, but we see their attempt to write on. And also we see what looks like ICXC. That's the thing we couldn't see on the first slide. I think this particular icon is Our Lady of Kazan. It may not be, but anyway, look at the ICXC again. That is just like the MP. Think at the top, Mother of God, and then the ICXC, first and last letters are Jesus in Greek, Jesus, and then the thing it looks like S. In other words, in icons, the letters, what looks like a C to us is a sigma. There's a word for it. I can't remember what the word for it, if there's a word for what kind of sigma that is. Anyway, what that ICXC and what looks like, that's the abbreviation of Jesus Christ, the Greek word Jesus, Christos. And notice that those 3 star things or whatever they are, they're going to be there even if you can't see one of them, but they're there. So even though this is a sort of an imitation done in Roman letters, It's there. What's there? The Mother of God, Jesus Christ, and the thing that says the being. The next slide, please. Now we're getting into the Timken. The royal gates, also known as the royal doors. And Orthodox churches have a sanctuary screen. That sanctuary screen, the pronunciation in English, I've never heard anybody pronounce it this way, but it's the way it's pronounced. The word is iconostasis. I know it sounds like something that Ogden Nash would have come up with. Ogden Nash said the rhinoceros is preposterous, and this is the iconostasis, which is a sanctuary screen, and in the center of it, you have these doors. The doors are sacred, and there's a screen there that they're only open for the priest to go in to begin the service. Now, in the Timken, one wall is hung as if it were the sanctuary screen, and that's where the doors are. This is a typical, remember we said the iconography is fixed, set by tradition, strictly regulated. And so what do we have at the top? We have the Annunciation, Archangel Gabriel as you look at it, on the left, and Mary on the right. This is at the top. You say, well, I don't see that. You keep talking about all this stuff is on there. It's there. You just can't see it in this slide. If we were in the museum, I would show it to you. Even in the museum, it's hard to see, but it's there. In other words, the Miter Theou, Mother of God, it's there over her head. Can't see it, but there it is. The other figures there are 4 other figures, and starting at the upper right, Matthew. Under him, Mark. Then who? Luke. And then John. How do you know that? It says so. I don't see anything. I know you can't see it on this slide, but it's written in Greek. It tells you who they are. And for those who are familiar with the term synoptic gospels, notice that 3 of these images look sort of alike and one's different. Well, the ones, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those are the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic Gospels. And then the other one looks different. That's John. John is different. John, the Gospel was written on the island of Patmos. Now, in the museum, the wall, as I say, the wall that represents the sanctuary screen is hung as if it were just like in a Greek Orthodox church. And we'll start with the next slide. All right, this is not one of ours, but I'm going to ask you again. Do you see the writing that we were talking about? Do you see beside Mary, over on the left, the abbreviation, the monograms, whatever you want to call them, for Mother of God? It's there. Look at Jesus's halo. You see there the Omicron, Omega, Nu, and you see the abbreviation, the monogram abbreviation of Jesus Christ. Now this is called the deesis. That's what's written at the top. Deesis is a Greek word for supplication. And who are the most important supplicants in the Bible? In other words, as far as Jesus is concerned, are his mother, Mary. And of course, on the right, it says in writing John something. If you know any Greek, you're going to tell me the word Baptist isn't there. I don't know what it says. It doesn't say Baptist, and you would be right. It does not say that because in Greek Orthodox depictions, he is called the forerunner. And that's why, in other words, you can see the abbreviation of St. John, but there's no word for Baptist there. It's prodromos, the forerunner. Now, in the Timken, the deesis is represented right above the royal doors, and this is the simplest form. It's called trimorphon, three figures. Jesus giving a blessing, and the orants, they're called orants, the people who are praying. And in the museum, it's hung that way, and the other orants are added in hierarchical order as they are in the museum, and that would be then St. Gabriel, St. Michael, St. Peter, and St. Paul. It's hung that way in the museum. However, in the museum, the Christ, it's seen here enthroned, is done in an icon that's in a different style from the orants, the ones praying on either side. Slide. That's what it looks like in the museum. Now, if you have very sharp eyes, you can look at this and maybe you can make out there's writing on either side of the halo. It's very, very hard to see, but it is the monogram for Jesus Christ, the thing that looks like ICXC. It's there. It's really hard to see here, but this is Christ enthroned. And in the Timken, this image appears right above the doors, and he's flanked by the orants, again, arranged hierarchically. Mary, John the Baptist, Gabriel, St. Michael, St. Peter, St. Paul. Some iconostases have more than that, but that's what we have hanging in the museum. So this is the Savior enthroned. Now we'll move on to something entirely different. Slide. This is called a tabletka. It's about the size of a notebook, a spiral notebook. It's not very big. It's mounted on a pedestal in the museum. And these things are, one side has one image, one side has the other. What are we looking at? The 40 martyrs of Sebaste, 4 men in the fiery furnace. Well, what are we talking about?
Bill, I don't know if it's just us, but I think we're having a few issues with your audio. You're on mute right now.
How far back do I have to go?
I would start at the beginning of this slide again.
Of this slide?
You know. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. 40 martyrs of Sebaste, 4 men in the fiery furnace. This is a tabletka. Notice the size, it's 9 by 7, it's not very big. They're back to back on a pedestal in the museum. 40 martyrs of Sebaste. I have not counted. But regardless, there should be 41 figures in this. We'll get to that in a minute. The 12th Roman Legion Fulminata in Sebaste, Armenia, that's now in Turkey. But they were Christians, and if they would not renounce their faith, they would be required to stand in the month of March. It's very cold there, on a frozen lake until they froze to death. However, if anyone wished to renounce his faith, a hot bath was available. Look up on the right there. See, can you see that one of the 40 is going in to say, okay, I give up. And he's entering the hot bath. He said, okay, I renounce my faith. I want to get in that hot water. And then in the lower right, as you look at it, can you tell that somebody's taking off his clothes or taking off his cloak? That's the guard. He was so impressed by the 39 who stayed, he decided to take the apostate's place and join the 39, making it 40 again. Maybe that's sort of a mass martyrdom by hypothermia. They were supposed to stand there till they froze to death. Only one man left. Okay, remember the 40 martyrs, 40 members of the 12th Roman Legion. Licinius was the Roman emperor at that time. Sebaste, Armenia, now in Turkey. On the right, 4 men in the fiery furnace. Well, there certainly are 4 people there. I hope everyone, 4 people, but I see 3 people wearing these red hats and an angel. So it's not really 4 men exactly. It's 3 men and an angel. Well, who are those 3 men? This is biblical. This is from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And everything is there. In other words, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not their Hebrew names. This is in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar. They've got everything is in this depiction. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden image. The golden image is there on a pedestal. You can see it on the upper right. In Daniel, it just says golden image. It doesn't say who it was. But anyway, Nebuchadnezzar declared that at the sound of music, everybody had to bow down to it. And then someone turned in these 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, said, those guys aren't bowing down. And Nebuchadnezzar had them called forth, because anybody who refused to bow down was going to be thrown in a fiery furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar was very angry about that. He heated the furnace 7 times as hot as normal. You can see the flames coming out. The men who threw them in there were overcome by the flames. They're in there. Everything is here. This is biblical. This is almost narrative. You have them dancing around in the flames. However, before they went in, they said, our God can save us. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship. We're not going to bow down to that statue. And so Nebuchadnezzar had them thrown in, and there they were seen to be dancing around in the flames. And when they came out, their clothes were not singed. They did not smell like smoke. And that's another miracle here is they tried to kill them by hyperthermia. So we have hypothermia on one side of the tabletka and hyperthermia on the other. However, the 40 martyrs, they all froze to death except for one who renounced his faith. Anyway, this is called a tabletka, like the English word tablet. And so we can now go on to the next slide. Whew, okay. Oh my goodness, this is one of ours. Notice this belongs to us. It's not really very big. This one, you can see writing at the top, that's Russian. That is Russian, the ascension of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, if you could see a Renaissance depiction, a Western, from Western Europe, of the ascension, it wouldn't look like this. And look at it. This is a very interesting thing. All right, so it says it's written in Russian, and the Russian says, of course, ascension of our Lord Jesus Christ, all written across the top. Oddly enough, it's Russian. Now you say, okay, where's the Mother of God? Is that? Yes, you can't see it in this slide, but it's there. But notice who is in the center of the painting. Who is in the center of the painting? The Mother of God. And she is late. You can't see it, but it's right above her head. Those other people are, of course, the 12 apostles. Notice that Mary, in the center of the painting, the iconography of this particular, but the iconography remains constant. Anytime you see the ascension, it's going to look like that. And she is in the center of the composition. She is the pillar and foundation of the church, the axis linking the earth with heaven, while Christ sits enthroned in glory among angelic powers. Mary, by the way, notice, aside from the angels, is the only one with a halo. The apostles don't have one. But in her, the angelic and earthly worlds meet. Now think about it. In Orthodox theology, you can't have the Son of God without the Mother. Mary is very, very important. That's why she's the center of the composition, and that's what she represents. It's a very, very important concept. Mary, the pillar and foundation of the church, the axis linking earth and heaven, while Christ is enthroned in glory among the angelic powers, the ascension. And then we'll go to another one. Slide, please. This isn't ours. However, you know the answer to my question. Does ours look like this? Yes, it does. Of course it does, because the iconography is fixed. I do not have any particular explanation of the shape of the image of Jesus there at the top. However, the interesting thing about the Transfiguration is that monks in training, we're talking about monks in training to become icon painter. This is the first one they're given to do. Temporal wood panel, of course, dimensions unknown. Now, the one we have, it isn't very large. It's about the size of the tabletka. However, what do we see? What are we looking at? Okay. Atop Mount Tabor. Now, this is an icon thing. In other words, comments about the icon say it was Mount Tabor. The Gospels, the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, don't mention what mountain Jesus went out to, but the commentary on icons say it was Mount Tabor. Atop Mount Tabor, 3 of the disciples, they're at the bottom, they're overcome. Peter, James, and John. They saw the deified body of Christ standing on a cloud between Moses and Elijah. His face shone like the sun. His garments became white as light. And of course, at this point, the, the, the disciples are just fall. That is the transfiguration. Oddly enough, it's not mentioned in the book of John. It's mentioned in the Synoptic Gospels. Our depiction of this has writing in it. This one doesn't. But in ours, the figures are indicated, their names are on. Well, written in Greek, of course. But anyway, this is the transfiguration. And they all look alike. As soon as you see that, whatever it is, I can't describe exactly what that is, but anyway, as soon as you see that, you know what you're looking at. Moses and Elijah flanking Jesus, and at the bottom, Peter, James, and John overcome by his glory. Slide, please. Okay, now the three-handed Mary. Ooh, three-handed Mary. I'm not sure I understand what that's about. Well, okay, the three-handed Mary. Now, before we start talking about that, let's look at this icon. This is ours. It's a Timken Museum, temper on wood panel, dimensions unknown. Well, they could measure. Okay, why are there three hands there? First of all, do we see the, I guess you can call them monograms, that we expect to see? Do we see the monogram for Mother of God up at the top, upper left, Mother, upper right of God? It's there. I hope everyone sees it. Right above Jesus's halo, we see the monogram for Jesus Christ, and we see in his halo the on, in other words, the being. In other words, these and do we see those three, whatever they are, stars, crosses, whatever? We'll see the ones that we can see. We're used to that. Okay, however, let's talk about where'd that other hand come from? Okay. We're now in the 8th century of the Common Era. The Byzantine Emperor Leo III has banned icons. Remember the iconoclasm and all that. John of Damascus. He's Syrian. In other words, this is, notice when we're talking about now, this is the three hands. The icon, of course, is Madonna Hodegetria. We'll get to that next, but we're talking about the three hands now. Why is that there? Okay. So it has to do with St. John of Damascus. Damascus was in Syria. The caliphate had moved from Baghdad to Syria, to Damascus. Okay, so the Emperor Leo can't touch John directly, John Damascene, John of Damascus. So he has a letter forged in John's handwriting in which John is made to say that Damascus is poorly defended and he, in other words, he could deliver it into the hands of the emperor. This letter the emperor passes to the Umayyad Caliph in Damascus, who is naturally incensed at this disloyalty and has John's right hand amputated as punishment. Okay, that's where the hand came from. Okay, John places the hand before the icon of the Mother of God, which is what that icon is. And while he prays to her, The Mother of God takes pity on him, and when he falls asleep, she appears to him in a dream, and his hand is restored. He wakes up, finds his hand restored, and then he's summoned before the caliph, who sees John's restored hand, concludes that he must have been innocent, and restores him to the post of first counselor. John prostrates himself before the caliph, begs permission, as he puts it, to take another path, to follow him who said, "I am the way." Now, this "I am the way" is going to come up again. So just remember, I am the way. Okay, so John gives away his wealth, sets off to Jerusalem, and goes out into the desert. But he puts a silver hand on the icon, and that's where it came from. And then later on, it just, rather than just hanging on there, it got painted on there. So that hand is the hand of St. John of Damascus. Johanna Igdimashki in Arabic. Oh, and he's a Syrian. But anyway, that's where the hand came from. Now let's talk about the image itself. Slide, please. Okay, there it is. Look how big that is. 51 by 42 inches. That's one of ours. Moscow school. In my experience, Moscow school has to do with that sort of gold and red garments that Jesus is wearing. Okay, are the monograms there that we're accustomed to seeing? There's the monogram, Mother of God, up at the top, upper right, upper left, Mother of God, it's there. The Jesus Christ monogram is above his head. It's hard to see in this slide, but the other monogram, the other word on the being in the halo, it's there. Notice Mary's wearing the maphorion, and you can see two of those images. And in one source, but as I say, I've never seen a funny Greek word for it. But anyway, it's the sort of the triple star-shaped cross, the ancient Syrian symbol of virginity. In other words, prenatal, in partu, and postpartum. Mary is holding Jesus on her left arm. Now, granted, the one that we just looked at was the reverse, the one with the three hands. That one, we looked at the reverse. But anyway, this is the normal depiction, and she is pointing to him. Remember, we said we're going to bring that, you're going to hear that again. I am the way. Jesus said, I am the way. Mary is pointing to him. And this is notice it's called the Georgian Mother of God. When I first started at the Timken a while ago, it was called the Jerusalem Mother of God. And we'll get to that in a moment. But anyway, this is called this. In other words, there are about 16 different ways to depict the Mother of God. This is surely one of the most common. The Madonna Hodogitria, Hodogitria meaning she who points the way. Oddly enough, in modern Greek, Hodogitria is the word for conductress. Well, I guess a conductress, and it's a feminine noun, shows you the way. And now, in these Madonna Hodogitrias, Jesus sometimes is blessings. He's holding different things, various things. In this one, he's holding a sprig of wheat. This is sprig of wheat. Okay, what does that bring to mind? Well, there are grapes and a sprig of wheat bring to mind the Eucharist, the body and blood. Also, at least suggests to me, I'm not claiming that this icon depicts that, but it suggests it to me, a sprig of wheat. The Latin word for sprig is spica, The Spanish word is espiga, and there's a Spanish hymn, Una espiga dorada por el sol. In other words, a sprig made golden by the sun. Bread of life. And in English, the word spica, a star. There's a constellation in the western sky. In the summer, it shows a maiden bearing a sprig of wheat. And I ask you, what constellation is that? This is my idea. I didn't read this in a book, but he's holding a sprig of wheat. The word for that is, well, in Latin anyway, it's spiga. And spica is a star found in the constellation. You won't be surprised. What constellation is it? Virgo the Virgin. So that's my idea of what that is. Now, since we're talking about this, and originally this painting was called the Jerusalem Mother of God because, so, well, why is that? Well, because it was thought that the original was painted in Jerusalem. By whom? By legend, St. Luke himself. Slide. There it is. This is not our own. I mean, this painting isn't our own, but we do have a painting of Il Guercino in the Timken. Here's Il Guercino. And what is this? St. Luke displaying a painting of the Virgin. What Virgin? The Western version, of course, but that's the Madonna Hodegetria, said to have been painted by St. Luke himself. Now, this is not an icon. Even the painting that St. Luke is pointing to is not an icon. Notice Mary. Mary does not have that maroon maphorion. She has what she has in Western art, a red gown and a blue cloak. However, while we're at it, this is a Western painting, a Western Baroque painting. It doesn't say St. Luke on it, but how do we know that's St. Luke? It's there. It's on the painting. The way we do it in the West. In the West, saints or whatever are identified by what we call attributes. Does everyone see it? It's on the right. What do we see? An ox. That's the symbol of St. Luke. And in Western art, that's how in other words, in icons, it's written down for us. But here, that this is the way we do it in the West. Now, there's an interesting thing about that. I don't want to run out of time here, but one more thing about St. Luke. Our Lady of Guadalupe, not the one in Mexico, the one in Spain. The Our Lady of Guadalupe, there's a town in Spain called Guadalupe, and there's an image there. And just like the one here, the image was found, having been buried by priests to keep the invading Berber tribesmen from getting it. But according to legend, it was given by Pope Gregory to the Archbishop of Toledo. And legend has it that image, the image of the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is in Guadalupe in Spain, was sculpted by St. Luke, and a Dominican, referring to the Spanish version, said, that's ridiculous. If St. Luke had been a sculptor, St. Paul would have said so. Slide. Now, of the depictions of the Virgin Mary, we said that the Madonna Hodegetria is one style. This is another. Now, this one is called, I got very confused when I was first studying this because there are two versions. This is an abbreviated version of another one, the one called the Madonna of the Sweet Kiss. That's a larger one, but this shows just shoulders. Now, there are several things about this. First of all, what we always ask, do we see what we have been taught to see? Do we see the monogram Mother of God? It's there. It's at the top. It seems to be on the frame, but it's there. Do we see the monogram Jesus Christ? Yes, it's there. Do we see the three star-shaped crosses or whatever? Yes, they're there, at least the ones you can see. And on the halo of Jesus, do we see those three letters? Well, we see the ones that we can see. It's all there. In other words, anytime you see an icon with the Mother of God and Jesus, it's going to say that. It's going to be there somewhere. And I will admit, there's another icon in the museum, and I was talking about that, and a sharper-eyed museum visitor than me said, it's there. It's very faded, but it's there. I said, oh my goodness, yes, there it is. Thank you so much for letting me know. Now, at the beginning, I said, do you find all of these things lifeless poses? Well, what about Mary? What does this look like? Does she look unhappy? Why would Mary be unhappy? Wouldn't she know what's going to happen to Jesus? In other words, this is not a lifeless. I ask your opinion. Is this a lifeless pose, or does it show Mary and Jesus? And by the way, notice Our Lady of where? Korsun. You know where that is? It's in the Ukraine, being bombarded by the Russians as we speak, probably. It's linked to a Greek prototype. Anyway, let's see. It's related to a Greek prototype of Our Lady of the Sweet Kiss, reduced to the faces of Mary and the baby close together, exchanging caresses and kisses. However, one more thing about this in Russian icons, and this is a Russian icon, both of her hands are shown. And there they are. Now we have one more slide to go. Thank you. Archangel Michael. Now it says so at the top. In the middle top, that writing, that's not Greek, that's Russian. Those letters are called long capitals. And Russian word order is a little different from the English because in Russian it says Saint Archangel Michael. We don't say it that way, but that's what it says. So what do we see? I don't know why. I've never seen any explanation of it, but this kind of depiction of Michael the Archangel, the horse is always red, some color of red. Okay, Michael is depicted as winged above and between the wings. It's really hard to see here, but there's a halo, rainbow, God's promise. So he's blowing the trumpet of judgment, and he's holding, it's a very funny looking lance. Can everyone see he's got a lance? He's got a lance in his hand, and he is holding a book. He's holding three things. Well, four counting the lance. He's got the trumpet and the book of judgment, a censer, see it on the right, in front of the trumpet, and he's holding that really funny looking lance, but it's shaped like a cross. That cross is piercing a demon at the bottom, and you can see these troubled waters. That's evil, and drowning in the evil is the evil city of Babylon. Hope everyone can see that. Saint Michael the Archangel, and as I say, you've got everything here. In other words, this is not exactly biblical, but and there are other ways to depict St. Michael the Archangel, but this is one way, and it will always look like that. The trumpet, the book, the censer, the lance, the evil spirit, the tossing seas, and Babylon. Thank you very much. That is all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Bill, for a wonderful presentation. Now at this time, if anyone has any questions, we welcome you to put them on the chat or even unmute yourself to ask. I actually, before anyone else gets a chance, I had one quick question about just, you had mentioned how a lot of these images were arranged in like the hierarchical order.
Yes.
Could you go through that order one more time? I just didn't catch it all and I wanted to like note that down.
Yes, of course. Okay. In the deises, the first tier above the doors, deises means supplication. Jesus is flanked by Mary, his mother, and John the Baptist. They are the principal orants, orants, the ones who offer prayers in the New Testament. And then if there are other figures added, they are added what is called hierarchically, in other words, according to precedence. In other words, it's going to be Mother of God, John the Baptist, St. Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel, Archangel Michael, St. Peter, St. Paul. In other words, down one side, on the side where John the Baptist is, which is on the right as you look at it, it goes John the Baptist, St. Michael the Archangel, and then St. Paul. Going the other way, it's the Mother of God, Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel, and St. Peter. That the hierarchical means, by category. In other words, Mother of God, John the Baptist, archangels, and then apostles. Hierarchical, church order, what do you want? That's what that means.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you so much. Try to memorize the order.
Well, there can be others. In other words, it extends the first tier, the deises tier. It can extend hard. In other words, if you look at the icon of the Last Judgment, it's got a deises tier you wouldn't believe. But anyway, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I want to thank you all once again for joining us today. We hope you guys can join us next Thursday for another one of these virtual tours. And thank you all for joining us. Bye.
Bye. You have anything for me? Okay, good.